First Officer Naomi Carter had endured the humiliating security checks, the mocking whispers from colleagues, and the passengers who questioned whether a black woman could really fly their plane. Flight 447 to Denver was supposed to be just another day of proving herself worthy of the uniform she'd earned through 4,000 hours of flawless flying. But when Captain Miller collapsed at 30,000 feet and the left engine failed in the middle of a violent storm, everyone who had doubted her that morning was about to learn exactly why judging a pilot by her skin color instead of her skill could cost them their lives. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The morning sun cast long shadows across Terminal B at Atlanta International Airport as First Officer Naomi Carter made her way through the bustling crowds. Her crisp navy blue uniform bore 4 gold stripes on each shoulder, and her captain's hat sat perfectly positioned atop her neatly styled hair. At 34 years old, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned every stripe through countless hours in the cockpit. Yet despite her professional appearance, she could feel the weight of curious stares following her through the terminal. Some looks were admiring, young children pointing excitedly at a real pilot, their parents smiling warmly. Others carried that familiar edge of skepticism she'd grown accustomed to over the years. An elderly man did a double take, his eyes narrowing as they traced from her face to her uniform and back again. A group of businessmen paused their conversation to watch her pass, one muttering something that made the others chuckle. Naomi kept her chin high and her pace steady. She'd learned long ago that acknowledging these moments only gave them more power than they deserved. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Angela. Maya's science presentation is today at 2. She's doing it on female aviators. Guess who her hero is? Naomi smiled, picturing her 14-year-old niece standing before her class, talking about breaking barriers in aviation. Maya had inherited the Carter determination, that same fire that had pushed Naomi through flight school when instructors doubted her abilities, through the financial struggles of accumulating flight hours, through the subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination that tried to ground her dreams before they could take flight. She paused near a coffee shop, her reflection catching in the polished window. For a moment, she saw her father standing beside her in that same reflection, a trick of memory and morning light. Marcus Carter had worked 3 jobs to help pay for her flight training, never living to see her earn her commercial pilot's license. "Baby girl," he'd said during his final days in the hospital, "we're going to touch the sky for both of us. Don't let anyone tell you different." The memory faded as she checked her watch. Flight 447 to Denver was scheduled for a 10:15 a.m. departure, and she needed to complete her pre-flight preparations. She'd been assigned to fly with Captain Robert Miller, a veteran pilot with over 25 years of experience with the airline. She'd heard about Miller through the crew grapevine. Old school, methodical, had started flying when the cockpit was almost exclusively a boys' club. Some said he was professional but distant with female crew members. Others suggested he was simply set in his ways. Naomi found Captain Miller in the crew lounge, reviewing weather reports on his tablet. He was exactly as she'd pictured, late 50s, silver hair, military short, posture that suggested former Air Force. His weathered face bore the permanent squint lines of someone who'd spent decades scanning horizons. "Captain Miller," she extended her hand. "Naomi Carter. I'm your first officer for the Denver flight." Miller glanced up, his pale blue eyes taking in her appearance with a quick assessment. He shook her hand briefly. Firm grip, minimal contact. "Carter, right? You're the—" He paused, seeming to search for words, the diversity initiative pilot they mentioned in the briefing. The words hung in the air like ice crystals. Naomi felt her jaw tighten, but kept her expression neutral. "I'm a pilot with over 4,000 flight hours, type-rated on the 737 and A320 series. I believe I was assigned based on my qualifications, sir." "Of course," Miller said, though his tone suggested he was humoring her. He turned back to his tablet. "I've already reviewed the flight plan. You can handle the walk-around if you'd like. Check that they've loaded the catering properly. Sometimes they forget the first-class meals." Naomi recognized the dismissal for what it was. The walk-around was important, but Miller was treating her like a flight attendant supervisor rather than his co-pilot. "I'll complete the full exterior inspection as well," she said evenly. "And I've already reviewed the weather patterns. There's a system moving through Kansas that might require us to adjust our route." Miller looked up again, surprised. "You've already checked the weather?" "I always arrive prepared, Captain." Before Miller could respond, another voice cut through the lounge. Well, looks like it's Diversity Day in the cockpit." Ethan Hawthorne strode in, all confidence and cologne. At 32, he was the type who treated his pilot's uniform like a costume designed to impress women in airport bars. His blonde hair was styled with enough product to survive a hurricane, and his smile never quite reached his eyes. "Hawthorne," Miller acknowledged with notably more warmth than he'd shown Naomi. "Thought you were on the Chicago run today. Switched shifts. I'm jump seating to Denver for a positioning flight tomorrow." Ethan's gaze slid to Naomi, taking in her uniform with an expression that bordered on amusement. "You must be the new diversity hire everyone's talking about." "Naomi, right?" "First Officer Carter," she corrected, not bothering to extend her hand. Right. First Officer Carter." Ethan's emphasis on the title carried a mocking edge. "How many hours you got?" 2,000? 2,500. 4,200, Naomi replied. "Yourself." Ethan's smirk faltered slightly. 3,800. "But it's not just about hours, you know. It's about the quality of training, the right instincts, the ability to land in a 30-knot crosswind at LaGuardia." Naomi interrupted smoothly. "Or perhaps recovering from a full stall in icing conditions. I've done both. Multiple times." Captain Miller cleared his throat. "We should head to the gate. Don't want to delay boarding." As they gathered their gear, Ethan fell in a step beside Naomi. "You know," he said quietly enough that Miller wouldn't hear, "quotas might get you in the door, but they won't keep you in the air when things get tough." Naomi stopped, turned to face him fully. "You know what got me in this door? Graduating top of my class at Embry-Riddle. Logging twice the required hours before my commercial check ride. Passing every exam on the first attempt with scores that probably exceeded yours. So if you want to compare qualifications, Ethan, I'm happy to do it publicly. Otherwise, enjoy your jump seat." She walked away before he could respond, but she could feel his stare burning into her back. At the gate, the boarding process was already underway. Gate agent Sandra Williams, a middle-aged black woman who'd worked at the airport for 15 years, brightened when she saw Naomi approach. "Captain Carter, good to see you again. Just first officer for now, Sandra," Naomi corrected with a warm smile. "But someday soon, I bet." Sandra's expression shifted to concern. "Listen, heads up, we've got some TSA folks doing random checks today. They're being particularly thorough." As if on cue, a TSA officer, young, barely out of training by the look of him, stepped forward. His badge read K. Peterson, and his face bore the aggressive eagerness of someone who treated minor authority like major power. "Ma'am, I need you to step aside for a random security screening." Naomi glanced at Captain Miller and Ethan, who had walked past without being stopped. "I'm crew. You can see my uniform and credentials. Random means random, ma'am. Please step aside." The boarding area had grown quiet. Passengers in line craned their necks to watch. Naomi could feel dozens of eyes on her as Officer Peterson went through her flight bag with unnecessary thoroughness, removing each manual, checking every pocket. He held up her pilot's license like he was examining a suspected forgery. "This is really you?" he asked loudly, ensuring everyone nearby could hear. "You're listed as a pilot?" "First officer, yes." Naomi kept her voice level despite the heat rising in her cheeks. "Just seems." Peterson trailed off, then actually laughed. "I mean, did you borrow this uniform or something? Halloween was last month." Several passengers chuckled. Others looked uncomfortable. A teenage boy, maybe 16, wearing a Howard University hoodie, stood with his mother near the gate. His eyes were fixed on Naomi, his expression a mixture of anger and admiration as she maintained her composure. "Officer Peterson," Naomi said, reading his badge deliberately, "I'd be happy to provide any additional documentation you require. However, I should mention that delaying active flight crew from pre-flight duties is a federal violation. I'm sure your supervisor would be interested in discussing why you've detained a uniformed pilot for 15 minutes without cause. Peterson's face reddened. I'm just doing my job. Poorly, Sandra interjected, stepping forward. Officer Carter has been flying out of this airport for 3 years. I can vouch for her credentials. A supervisor appeared, clearly summoned by Sandra's raised voice. Greg Thompson, according to his badge, looked harried and annoyed. What's the holdup? Random screening, Peterson muttered. Thompson looked at Naomi's uniform, her credentials laid out on the screening table, and the growing crowd of impatient passengers. She's cleared. Let her through. As Naomi collected her belongings, Thompson pulled her aside. I apologize for the inconvenience, but you need to understand, we have procedures, and you should really maintain better professionalism during these checks. Getting emotional doesn't help anyone. Emotional? Naomi's voice was dangerously quiet. I stated facts and regulations. If that seems emotional to you, perhaps you should examine your own biases, Mr. Thompson. She didn't wait for his response. The teenage boy in the Howard hoodie caught her eye as she passed. He gave her a small nod of respect, and she returned it with a slight smile. Inside the jetway, Captain Miller was waiting with barely concealed impatience. Everything sorted? Just TSA being thorough, Naomi replied, not trusting herself to say more. Well, try not to cause any more delays. We have a schedule to maintain. The implication that she had caused the delay made Naomi's hands clench, but she forced them to relax. As they entered the aircraft, she looked down the narrow aisle at the rows of seats that would soon hold over 150 souls. Each flight was a responsibility, a trust. Her father had always said that excellence was the best revenge against those who doubted you. You'll see me in the cockpit, she whispered to herself, straightening her uniform. Not in handcuffs, not in defeat. In the cockpit where I belong. The Boeing 737-800 hummed with pre-flight energy as passengers filed aboard Flight 447. Naomi stood in the cockpit doorway for a moment, watching the orchestrated chaos of boarding. Families wrestled with overhead bins, business travelers typed furiously on phones, and flight attendants navigated the aisles with practiced grace. Quite a mix today, observed Lisa Chun, the lead flight attendant, squeezing past Naomi with a smile. Lisa had been flying for 12 years and had seen it all. We've got 2 unaccompanied minors, a retired general in first class, and apparently some tech executive who's already complaining about the Wi-Fi not being activated yet. Naomi stepped back into the cockpit where Captain Miller was already seated in the left seat, running through his pre-flight checklist with mechanical precision. The cockpit was a symphony of switches, dials, and displays, a complex environment that had become Naomi's second home. She slid into the right seat, immediately beginning her own flow of checks. Through the cockpit window, she could see the ground crew preparing for pushback. The December morning was crisp and clear, perfect flying weather at least until they reached the weather system over Kansas. She pulled up the latest meteorological data on her display, noting the storm's eastward progression. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Miller's voice crackled over the intercom before Naomi could mention the weather update. We're expecting a smooth flight to Denver today. Flight time approximately 2 hours and 30 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight. He clicked off the intercom without mentioning the weather system or potential turbulence. Naomi frowned but held her tongue. Perhaps he planned to update passengers once they were airborne. The passenger manifest showed 153 souls on board. Among them, the Garrett family. Mother Sarah, traveling with 8-year-old twins Marcus and Mia, settled into row 15. The children pressed their faces to the window, excited for their first flight to see their grandmother. In first class, General Thomas Harrison, 71 years old and ramrod straight despite his age, opened a worn paperback, another military memoir by the look of it. The tech executive Lisa had mentioned was Harrison Brooks, seated in 2A, already flagging down a flight attendant to complain about the lack of premium bottled water options. His designer suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and his wrist bore a watch that could fund a small scholarship. And in row 23, the teenager from earlier, Naomi had heard his mother call him Jalen, sat with his nose already in a book about aviation history. His mother, Patricia, was nervously checking her seatbelt for the third time. "First time flying?" Jalen asked his mother gently. "Not since your father." Patricia trailed off, then forced a smile. "But watching that pilot lady handle those TSA fools? If she can stay that calm with them, she can handle an airplane." In row 8, an elderly white couple, the Richardsons, were settling in. Naomi could see them through the open cockpit door as Martha Richardson clutched her husband Frank's arm. "Did you see her?" Martha whispered, though not quietly enough. "The co-pilot? She's, you know." "Martha, please," Frank muttered, but he too kept glancing toward the cockpit. "I'm just saying," Martha continued, "these airlines nowadays with their diversity quotas. She can't possibly be flying this thing, right? They probably just have her up there for show." Ethan Hawthorne, making his way to the jump seat at the back of the cockpit, paused to listen to their conversation with barely concealed amusement. He leaned into the cockpit. "Looks like you've got some fans out there, rookie." "First Officer Carter," Naomi corrected automatically, not looking up from her instruments. Right. First Officer." Ethan settled into the jump seat with exaggerated comfort. "You know, I did my training at the same time as Rebecca Martinez. You know her? Another diversity hire. Washed out after 6 months. Couldn't handle the pressure when the simulators got tough." "That's unfortunate for her," Naomi replied evenly, checking hydraulic pressures. "Though I'm curious why you assume her failure had anything to do with her ethnicity rather than individual circumstances." Captain Miller cleared his throat. "Let's maintain professional cockpit decorum, shall we?" But Ethan wasn't finished. "I'm just saying, when airlines prioritize checking boxes over checking skills, safety suffers. No offense, Carter, but facts are facts." Naomi turned her seat to face him fully. "Fact. My landing rate in adverse conditions is 97% optimal, compared to the airline average of 91%. Fact. I've never had a safety violation or passenger complaint in 3 years of commercial flying. Fact. I logged 200 hours of night flying and 300 hours of instrument conditions before getting my commercial license. All self-funded. Would you like more facts? Or would you prefer to sit quietly and observe how a professional operates?" Miller actually chuckled, a dry sound like rustling leaves. "She's got you there, Hawthorne." Before Ethan could respond, Miller's hand went to his chest briefly, a slight grimace crossing his face. "You all right, Captain?" Naomi asked. "Fine. Just some heartburn. Had airport food for breakfast. Never a good idea." He popped an antacid from his shirt pocket, but Naomi noticed his hand trembling slightly as he reached for his water bottle. She made a mental note to watch him carefully. "Ladies and gentlemen," Naomi's voice came over the intercom, warm and confident. "This is First Officer Carter. While we complete our final preparations, I wanted to make you aware of a weather system over eastern Kansas. We may experience some minor turbulence about 90 minutes into our flight, but nothing to be concerned about. We'll do our best to find you smooth air. Flight attendants, please prepare for departure." In row 23, Jalen looked up from his book, smiling. "Mom, that's her. The pilot from the security line. She's flying our plane." "Thank the Lord," Patricia muttered, meaning it. But in row 12, Naomi had noticed something else entirely. A man in a dark jacket, late 30s, nervous energy radiating from every movement, kept checking his watch and shifting in his seat. His carry-on was clutched tightly in his lap despite flight attendant requests to stow it properly. David Brennan, according to the manifest. His eyes darted constantly between the cockpit and the exit doors. "Sir, you need to stow that bag," Lisa said firmly, approaching Brennan for the third time. "I'll hold it," he insisted, clutching it tighter. "It's fragile equipment. FAA regulations require." "Fine." He shoved it under the seat with obvious reluctance, his leg immediately pressing against it as if to ensure it stayed close. Naomi filed this away as another mental note. Probably just a nervous flyer with expensive equipment, but worth monitoring. She'd learned to trust her instincts over the years. They'd saved her more than once. "All secured back here," Lisa reported over the cabin intercom. Ground control. This is Delta 447 requesting pushback. Miller spoke into his headset. Delta 447, hold for gate verification, came to reply. A commotion at the aircraft door drew everyone's attention. Officer Peterson from TSA was back, now with 2 additional officers. They boarded the plane with grim determination. We need to verify the credentials of your first officer, Peterson announced loudly enough for half the plane to hear. Additional security screening required. Are you serious? Lisa stepped forward, hands on her hips. We're about to push back. Ma'am, please step aside. Naomi felt every eye in the forward cabin on her as she unbuckled and stood. The humiliation burned, but she kept her expression neutral. Captain Miller, would you please inform ground control of the delay? Miller looked torn between irritation at the delay and something else, perhaps a flicker of sympathy. This is ridiculous, he muttered, then louder. First Officer Carter has already been screened. This is highly irregular. Just following protocol, sir, Peterson replied, though his smirk suggested he was enjoying this. General Harrison stood up in first class, his military bearing unmistakable. Young man, I've been watching this harassment since the gate. This officer has shown nothing but professionalism while you've shown nothing but prejudice. I'll be filing a formal complaint with TSA leadership, whom I happen to know personally. Peterson's smirk faded. Sir, please remain seated. I've served this country for 40 years, son. I know harassment when I see it. The general's voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Complete your unnecessary check and get off this aircraft before I make some calls that will have you checking badges at a bus station. The second verification took less than 3 minutes. Clearly perfunctory now under the general's withering gaze and the growing hostility of delayed passengers. As the TSA officers retreated, a spontaneous round of applause broke out from several passengers, led by Jalen and his mother. Naomi returned to her seat, her face burning with a mixture of embarrassment and gratitude. Captain Miller surprised her by placing a hand briefly on her shoulder. That was handled well, Carter. Lesser pilots would have lost their composure. Thank you, Captain. Though I don't know why you had to provoke them in the first place, he added, removing his hand. The moment of connection evaporated. Ethan snorted from the jump seat. Yeah, existing while black. How provocative. The sarcasm in his voice was thick enough to cut, but before anyone could respond, he added, I mean, she should have just complied faster, right? Made it easier for everyone. Naomi gripped the yoke tighter, but said nothing. She'd learned to pick her battles, and they hadn't even left the ground yet. Ground control, Delta 447 requesting pushback. Miller repeated into his headset, his tone suggesting he wanted to put this entire incident behind them. Delta 447 cleared for pushback. Taxi to runway 27 via Alpha and Bravo. As the pushback tug connected and the aircraft began its slow reverse from the gate, Naomi ran through her mental checklist one more time. 153 passengers, 1 suspicious individual, 1 potentially ill captain, 1 hostile jump-seater, and weather ahead that was worse than forecast. She thought of her father's words, when turbulence hits, don't fight the storm, fly through it. Looking at the taxiway stretching ahead, Naomi had a feeling she'd need that advice before this flight was over. The aircraft turned toward the runway, its engines spinning up with that distinctive whine that meant they were minutes from takeoff. V1, rotate, V2, she murmured to herself, running through the takeoff speeds they'd calculated. These were the numbers that mattered, not the opinions of people who'd never sat in this seat. As the runway approached, she gripped the controls with steady hands. She was ready for whatever came next. Delta 447, cleared for takeoff, runway 27. Winds calm, visibility unlimited. Have a good flight. Delta 447, cleared for takeoff, Miller confirmed, advancing the throttles. The engines roared to life, pressing everyone back into their seats as the 737 accelerated down the runway. Naomi watched the airspeed indicator climb, 80 knots, 100, 130, calling out the critical speeds with practiced precision. V1, she announced. They were committed now, no turning back. Rotate, Miller called, pulling back on the yoke. The nose lifted, and suddenly they were airborne, Atlanta falling away beneath them. For all the chaos and conflict on the ground, up here there was only physics and skill. Up here, Naomi was exactly where she belonged. The Boeing 737 had been cruising smoothly at 32,000 feet for just over an hour when it happened. The afternoon sun painted golden streaks across the cloud tops below, and most passengers had settled into the rhythm of flight, some dozing, others absorbed in movies or books. Naomi had just finished reviewing their position relative to the Kansas weather system when she heard it. A sharp gasp from her left, followed by the distinctive thud of a body going limp. Captain Robert Miller's hands fell from the controls as his head lolled forward, his entire body slumping against his harness. His face had gone from its usual ruddy complexion to an alarming gray, and a thin line of saliva escaped from the corner of his mouth. "Captain!" Naomi immediately grabbed her control yoke, her training taking over even as adrenaline flooded her system. The aircraft gave a slight wobble as Miller's unconscious form shifted against his controls. She quickly but firmly pulled him back in his seat, ensuring he couldn't interfere with the flight controls. Ethan shot up from the jump seat, his earlier cockiness evaporating into naked panic. Oh God, is he dead? What do we? He's not dead, Naomi said sharply, her fingers finding Miller's carotid artery. The pulse was there, rapid and thready, but present. Get Lisa up here. Now. Ethan fumbled with the cockpit door, nearly falling over himself. Within seconds, Lisa Chun burst in, her professional calm fracturing at the sight of Miller unconscious. What happened? Looks like cardiac event or stroke. We need any medical personnel on board up here immediately. Naomi's voice was steady as steel, even as her mind raced through emergency protocols. Ethan, help me move him. You can't just, we need to, Ethan stammered, frozen in place. Ethan, Naomi's command voice snapped him to attention. Help me recline his seat. Lisa, make the announcement. Lisa grabbed the intercom with practiced efficiency. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical situation. If there are any doctors, nurses, or medical professionals on board, please identify yourself to a flight attendant immediately. The plane suddenly lurched, not violently, but enough to elicit gasps from a cabin. In a moment of crisis, the autopilot had disconnected. Naomi's hands flew over the controls, stabilizing their flight path with the kind of precision that came from thousands of hours of practice. I've got the aircraft, she announced formally, though there was no one conscious in the left seat to acknowledge the transfer of control. She reached for the radio. Denver Center, Delta 447 declaring a medical emergency. Captain is incapacitated. First Officer Carter has assumed command. Delta 447, roger that. What is the nature of the medical emergency? Captain appears to be having a cardiac event, requesting priority routing to nearest suitable airport. From the cabin came sounds of movement and raised voices. Dr. James Powell, a 60-year-old cardiologist returning from a medical conference, pushed his way forward, medical kit from the galley in hand. He was exactly the kind of person you'd want in this situation, calm, experienced, with hands that had saved hundreds of lives. I'm a cardiologist, he announced, squeezing into the cramped cockpit. His eyes quickly assessed Miller's condition. We need to get him flat. Can we move him? Negative, Naomi replied without hesitation. Not while I'm flying. Ethan, you're going to have to help the doctor. Do exactly what he says. Ethan's face had gone pale. But you can't. I should take over. I'm a pilot too, I should. You're not rated as pilot in command on this aircraft. Naomi cut him off. And you're clearly in no state to fly. Help the doctor or get out. Through the open cockpit door, the passenger cabin was descending into controlled chaos. The Richardsons in row 8 were clutching each other, Martha's earlier prejudices forgotten in the face of real fear. Frank, are we going to crash? No, ma'am, we are not, came a strong voice. General Harrison had stood up, his military bearing commanding attention. That first officer up there is in complete control. Everyone needs to remain calm and seated. But not everyone was listening. In row 12, David Brennan had jumped to his feet, reaching for his bag under the seat. His movements were frantic, desperate. "Sir, you need to sit down," a flight attendant called out. "I need my bag. I need—" Brennan yanked it free, but in his haste it fell open. Several electronic devices spilled out, wires, circuit boards, and what looked disturbingly like a timer mechanism. A woman screamed, "He's got a bomb!" Panic erupted. Passengers near Brennan scrambled away, climbing over seats, pushing toward the aisles. Parents clutched their children. Someone was sobbing. The plane tilted slightly as passengers rushed to one side. In the cockpit, Naomi felt the shift in the aircraft's center of gravity. Everyone needs to return to their seats immediately. She commanded over the intercom, her voice cutting through the chaos with absolute authority. "We are in no danger if everyone remains calm and seated." Flight attendants handled the situation. She switched back to air traffic control. "Denver Center, be advised we have a dual emergency. Medical situation with captain and potential security threat in the cabin. Requesting immediate law enforcement presence on landing." Delta 447, copy. "Can you specify the security threat?" "Passenger with suspicious electronic devices. Situation is being contained." Dr. Powell had managed to get Miller's tie and collar loosened. "He's stable for now, but he needs a hospital. How fast can you get us down?" "Working on it, doctor." Naomi scanned her instruments, calculating distances, fuel, weather. The nearest suitable airport was Wichita, 20 minutes if she pushed it. In the cabin, 2 air marshals had materialized from their undercover seats, badges out, hands on their concealed weapons. "Everyone stay back." "Sir, hand where we can see them." Brennan was babbling, tears streaming down his face. "It's not what you think. I'm an engineer. These are prototypes. I designed circuit boards for aviation systems." "Then why the timer?" Marshal Rodriguez demanded. "It's for testing response times and altitude pressure changes. I was bringing them to a conference. Please check my briefcase, my business cards, the conference registration." While the marshals investigated, Jalen had noticed something else. Despite the chaos around him, his young eyes were fixed on the cockpit. He could see Naomi through the door, her hands steady on the controls, her voice calm as she coordinated with air traffic control. He turned to the passengers around him. "Look at her," he said, his voice carrying surprising authority for a 16-year-old. "Look at the pilot. She's not panicking. She's got this." His mother Patricia nodded, finding her voice. "He's right. That pilot. She saved us when the plane shook earlier. She knows what she's doing." But Ethan wasn't convinced. Still in the cockpit, he suddenly lunged for the radio. "Denver Center, this is—" Naomi's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength. "Touch that radio again, and I'll have you restrained." Her eyes never left her instruments. "Doctor, is Ethan helping you or not?" "Not particularly," Dr. Powell admitted, working around Ethan to monitor Miller's vitals. "Then get him out of my cockpit." "You can't order me. I am the acting pilot in command of this aircraft." Naomi's voice dropped to a level that brooked no argument. "You are endangering the safety of this flight." "Lisa, have the marshals escort Mr. Hawthorne to a passenger seat." Lisa didn't hesitate. Within moments, despite Ethan's protests, he was being firmly guided to an empty seat in row 30, where a marshal could keep an eye on him. The investigation in row 12 had reached a conclusion. Marshal Rodriguez held up a conference badge and registration papers. "He's telling the truth. These are electronic prototypes for a Denver aviation conference." He turned to the panicked passengers. "False alarm, everyone. Please return to your seats." But the damage to calm was done. Fear had taken hold, and whispers rippled through the cabin. First the captain collapses, now this. Can she really fly this thing alone? Maybe we should have listened to that other pilot. Harrison Brooks, the tech executive, stood up. "I demand to know who's flying this plane. I have a board meeting in Denver that." "Sir, sit down." General Harrison's military command voice silenced him mid-sentence. "That first officer has this situation under control. Your board meeting is irrelevant if you interfere with her duties." Naomi's voice came over the intercom again, this time with a tone that was both calming and commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Carter. I am in full command of this aircraft. We've had a medical emergency with Captain Miller, who is receiving excellent care from a doctor on board. The security concern was a misunderstanding that has been resolved. We will be making a precautionary landing in Wichita in approximately 18 minutes. I need everyone seated with seatbelts fastened. To be absolutely clear, we are safe, this aircraft is under control, and I will get you on the ground safely. That is my promise to each of you." For a moment, silence filled the cabin. Then, from row 23, Jalen started clapping. Slowly, as the applause died down, Naomi was already dealing with a new crisis. The weather system over Kansas had shifted faster than predicted, and Wichita was now reporting wind shear warnings. She needed to recalculate, possibly divert to Kansas City, which would add crucial minutes to Captain Miller's medical emergency. "How's he doing, doctor?" she asked without turning from her instruments. "Stable, but critical. Every minute counts," Dr. Powell responded, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool cockpit temperature. "His color is getting worse." Suddenly, the plane shuddered, not the gentle bump of minor turbulence, but a violent shake that had overhead bins popping open and masks dropping from several rows. Screams erupted from the cabin as drinks went flying and passengers gripped their armrests. Naomi's hands danced over the controls, her voice remaining preternaturally calm. "Just turbulence, folks. I've got it." She adjusted their altitude, seeking smoother air, but the plane bucked again, harder this time. "What's happening?" Martha Richardson cried out, her earlier skepticism replaced by terror. "The storm," her husband Frank said, pointing out the window at the wall of dark clouds they were approaching. "It's worse than they said." In the cockpit, Naomi was discovering something far more troubling than weather. The left engine's readings were fluctuating wildly, not in a pattern consistent with turbulence, but suggesting mechanical failure. She ran a quick diagnostic, and her blood chilled at what she found. "Lisa," she called, "I need you to quietly check something. When Ethan was doing the pre-flight, did you see him complete the engine inspection?" Lisa thought back. "He said he'd done it, signed off on it. But now that you mention it, I saw him on his phone most of the time, arguing with someone." A sick feeling settled in Naomi's stomach. She pulled up the maintenance logs on her display. The left engine had been flagged for inspection due to a bird strike report from the previous flight. The inspection was signed off by E. Hawthorne at 9:45 a.m., but security footage would later show he was in the crew lounge at that exact time, making his phone call. "Denver Center, Delta 447, Naomi radioed. Be advised, we have indications of possible mechanical sabotage. Left engine showing signs of deliberately ignored maintenance requirements." Delta 447, say again. "Potential sabotage. Request law enforcement meet us on landing." Priority 1. From his seat in row 30, Ethan had gone white as a sheet. He started to unbuckle, but the marshal beside him placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "I don't think so. I need to explain. It's not what she thinks." "Then you can explain it on the ground." The plane lurched again, this time accompanied by a grinding sound from the left side. Several passengers who could see the wing gasped and pointed. "There's smoke. The engine's smoking." Naomi had already seen it on her instruments. The left engine was failing, temperature climbing dangerously. She had seconds to decide, try to nurse it along, or shut it down completely and fly on one engine through a storm. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice still impossibly steady, "we're going to shut down our left engine as a precaution. This aircraft is fully capable of flying on one engine. We trained for this exact scenario." Her fingers moved with practiced precision, running through the engine shutdown checklist from memory. The grinding stopped, replaced by an eerie quiet from the left side of the aircraft. "That's not normal, right?" 8-year-old Marcus asked his mother in row 15. "Planes need both engines?" "The pilot says we're safe, honey," Sarah Garrett replied, though her knuckles were white as she gripped both her children's hands. In first class, Harrison Brooks had his phone out, trying to film despite regulations. "This is insane. when I sue this airline. General Harrison reached over and plucked the phone from his hands. You're endangering everyone with that device active. Sit down and shut up, or I'll have you restrained for interfering with flight safety. Meanwhile, Naomi was performing calculations that would have challenged a computer, all while hand-flying the aircraft through increasingly violent turbulence. Distance to Wichita, 95 miles. Fuel consumption on one engine through headwinds increased by 40%. Time to get below the storm. Too long. Dr. Powell, she called. I need an honest assessment. Can Captain Miller survive another 25 minutes? The doctor checked Miller's pulse again, noting the increasingly irregular rhythm. It's going to be close. Very close. From the cabin, Lisa's voice crackled over the intercom. Naomi, we've got another problem. Some passengers are saying Ethan was seen near the left engine this morning before the official pre-flight. They thought he was inspecting it, but now. The pieces clicked into place in Naomi's mind. Ethan's hostility, his attempt to take control, his panic when things went wrong. This wasn't just negligence. This was deliberate. Did you do this? She asked over the cabin address system, knowing Ethan could hear her. Did you sabotage this aircraft to make me fail? Ethan's voice came from the back, high and desperate. I didn't sabotage anything. I skipped the inspection, okay? I thought it would be fine. Bird strikes hardly ever cause real damage. You skipped a mandatory safety inspection to make me look incompetent when something went wrong. Naomi's voice was ice. 153 lives, including yours, all to prove your bigoted point. The cabin erupted. Passengers were shouting, some trying to get to Ethan despite their seatbelts. The marshals had to physically block the aisle. Everyone stop. It was Jalen's voice, louder than anyone would have expected. Fighting won't help. Let her fly the plane. His words cut through the chaos, and a tense quiet settled over the cabin. All eyes turned back to the cockpit, where through the open door, they could see Naomi's silhouette, steady and determined against the storm-darkened sky ahead. Delta 447, air traffic control crackled through static. Be advised, Wichita is now reporting microbursts near the airport. Recommend diversion to. Negative, Naomi cut them off. Captain Miller won't survive a diversion. We're going to Wichita. First Officer Carter, those conditions are. I'm aware of the conditions. Clear all traffic. We're coming in. Dr. Powell looked up sharply. You're going to attempt a single-engine landing in a microburst? Doctor, you keep Captain Miller alive. That's your job. This is mine. The plane bucked again, harder than before, and this time warning alarms began blaring. The right engine, overtaxed from compensating, was showing stress indicators. Not failure, not yet, but stress. Lisa made her way carefully to the cockpit. Naomi, some of the passengers are demanding Ethan take over. They say a white man who deliberately endangered their lives should replace the black woman, keeping them alive. Naomi's laugh was sharp. Tell them they're free to file complaints when we're on the ground. Until then, I'm in command. Through her headset, she heard air traffic control conferring with someone. Then a new voice came on, older, authoritative. First Officer Carter, this is Regional Administrator Thompson. We're strongly recommending you divert to Kansas City. The conditions at Wichita. Mr. Thompson, Naomi interrupted. With all due respect, you're not sitting in this cockpit. You don't have a dying captain next to you or one engine shut down. I've landed in worse conditions than this. Clear the runway and have emergency vehicles standing by. The liability is mine. Carter out. She switched off the ground frequency temporarily, needing to focus. The storm wall loomed ahead, a massive tower of black clouds shot through with lightning. In 30 seconds, they'd be inside it. Everyone, this is going to get rough, she announced. Flight attendants, secure yourselves. Passengers, heads down, brace position when I give a word. We're going through this storm, and then we're landing. Trust me. From row 23, Patricia clutched her son's hand. You still believe in her? Jalen nodded firmly. She hasn't lied once. She said she'd keep us safe. The plane hit the storm wall like a ship hitting a tsunami. The aircraft dropped suddenly, 200 feet in 2 seconds, leaving everyone's stomach in their throat. Then it shot up again, the forces pressing everyone into their seats. Lightning flashed so close that the cabin lit up white, and the thunder was instantaneous. Naomi fought the controls with everything she had, using every trick she'd learned, but the worst was yet to come. As they descended through 8,000 feet, the right engine, their only functioning engine, gave a distinctive cough. The overtaxed components were beginning to fail. No, no, no. Naomi muttered, scanning her instruments. Oil pressure dropping. Temperature climbing. She could baby it, maybe get another 10 minutes out of it, but if it failed completely, what's happening? Dr. Powell asked, looking up from Miller, whose breathing had become increasingly labored. Nothing I can't handle, Naomi lied smoothly. Then, to the cabin, ladies and gentlemen, prepare for immediate landing. Brace positions now. Through the rain-lashed windscreen, she could barely make out the approach lights of Wichita's runway 19L. The wind was pushing them sideways at 40 knots. The right engine was making sounds no engine should make. Captain Miller's breathing was becoming agonal. And somewhere behind her, 152 people were counting on her to save their lives. Naomi thought of her father, of his faith in her, of Maya, her niece, watching the news tonight, of every person who'd ever told her she didn't belong in this seat. Not today, she said quietly. We're not failing today. She pushed the nose down, beginning their final approach into chaos. 8,000 feet above Wichita, with the right engine coughing like a dying man's last breath, Naomi Carter faced the kind of moment that defined pilots or destroyed them. The cockpit had become a battlefield, not just against failing machinery and violent weather, but against the prejudices that had followed her into the sky. First Officer Carter. The radio crackled with Administrator Thompson's voice again. We need confirmation of your command status. Is there another qualified pilot aboard who can verify your decisions? Naomi's hands never wavered from the controls, even as rage flashed through her. Administrator Thompson, I am the acting pilot in command under Federal Aviation Regulation 91.3. No verification required. But surely Mr. Hawthorne could. Mr. Hawthorne is under investigation for sabotage through deliberate negligence. Naomi cut him off. He skipped a mandatory bird strike inspection that has resulted in engine failure. Would you like me to hand control to someone who endangered 153 lives? Silence from the ground. Then, a different voice. The Wichita Tower controller, a woman named Denise whom Naomi had dealt with before. Delta 447, Wichita Tower. Runway 19 left is cleared. Emergency vehicles standing by. We trust you. First Officer Carter. Bring them home. From his restrained position in row 30, Ethan was shouting. I need to explain. Let me talk to her. I can help. Marshal Rodriguez kept him firmly in place. You've helped enough. But Ethan's voice carried forward. Naomi, the right engine. I know what's wrong. I've seen this before. Lisa looked to Naomi, who gave a sharp nod. The flight attendant grabbed the interphone. Talk fast. The bird strike damage. It can cause cascade failures between engines if they share hydraulic pressure. You need to reduce power on the right engine to prevent complete failure. Naomi had already considered this, but hearing it from Ethan made her suspicious. And why should I trust anything you say? Because, his voice cracked, because I don't want to die, and because you're the only one who can save us. I was wrong, okay? I was wrong about everything. The admission hung in the air. Naomi processed it in a fraction of a second, then made her decision. She pulled back slightly on the right engine's throttle, watching the temperatures. They stabilized. Not good, but better. Thank you, she said curtly, then focused back on the approach. Dr. Powell's voice was urgent. Miller's going into arrest. I need to start compressions. Do it, Naomi authorized, even as it meant losing another pair of hands that might have helped. The doctor began chest compressions, his counting a rhythmic backdrop to the chaos. Through the rain-streaked windscreen, the approach lights of Wichita Airport appeared and disappeared in the swirling darkness. The wind shear alarm screamed. They were being pushed 30 degrees off course. Naomi crossed the controls. using a technique she'd learned from an old instructor who'd flown in Vietnam, flying the plane sideways to maintain their approach path. "What's she doing?" Harrison Brooks demanded, looking out his window at the ground, sliding by at an angle. "The plane is sideways." General Harrison had moved to a position where he could see into the cockpit. His experienced eyes recognized the maneuver. "It's called a slip. She's compensating for the wind." That's exceptional flying." The teenager Jalen was pressed against his window, watching in awe. "Mom, look at the wings. She's controlling every movement. It's like she's dancing with the storm." And in a way, she was. Every gust was met with a counter movement, every drop with a power adjustment. Naomi had become one with the aircraft, feeling its responses through her hands and feet, anticipating what it needed before the need arose. 500 feet, the automated voice announced. "Minimums." Through the clouds and rain, the runway appeared, a ribbon of concrete that looked impossibly narrow from this angle. But Naomi could also see something else: news vans. Dozens of them, lined up along the airport perimeter. Someone had leaked the story. The world was watching. "Naomi," Lisa's voice was tight. "Half the passengers are praying, the other half are filming." "Let them," Naomi replied. "Maybe they'll learn something about judgment." 300 feet. The wind tried to slam them down, a microburst that would have crashed most pilots. But Naomi had been expecting it. She firewalled the remaining engine for 5 seconds, trading its last reserves of life for altitude, then immediately pulled back as they cleared the deadly downdraft. "Power, power, power," Dr. Powell shouted instinctively, even while performing compressions. "I've got it," Naomi assured him, her voice preternaturally calm. 200 feet. The right engine gave a final, shuddering cough and died completely. They were now in a powerless glide, in a storm, with a crosswind that was trying to flip them over. "Engine failure, engine failure," the automated systems announced helpfully, as if Naomi wasn't aware. From the cabin came screams, prayers, and somehow, cutting through it all, Jalen's voice: "She's got this. Look at her, she's got this." 100 feet. Naomi's world narrowed to the essential elements: airspeed, altitude, alignment. Her hands made micro-adjustments that kept them centered even as the plane wanted to weather vane into the wind. 50 feet. Through pure skill and determination, she had them lined up with the runway. But the crosswind was about to make the actual touchdown the hardest part. "Brace for impact," she commanded over the PA, though her voice suggested landing, not crashing. 20 feet. She kicked the rudder hard, swinging the nose to align with the runway at the last possible second. A perfect D-crab maneuver that would have impressed any instructor. 10 feet. The ground rushed up. The storm tried one last time to claim them, a vicious gust that tilted them dangerously. 5 feet. Naomi fought back, leveling the wings through sheer force of will. Contact. The main gear touched with a controlled firmness that spoke of intention, not accident. The nose gear followed a second later. They were down, but far from safe. With no engine power and a wet runway, she had only brakes and prayer to stop them before they ran out of concrete. "Reversers won't work without engines," she muttered, standing on the brakes as hard as she dared without locking them up. The anti-skid system cycled frantically, and she could smell burning brake pads, even in the sealed cockpit. The plane slowed, but not fast enough. The end of the runway was approaching, marked by approach lights that would tear the aircraft apart if they overran. Come on," Naomi whispered, modulating the brakes with the delicacy of a surgeon. 500 feet of runway left. 400. 300. Their speed was dropping, but physics was not on their side. 200 feet. 100. With 50 feet to spare, Delta Flight 447 came to a complete stop. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then the cabin erupted. Cheers, sobs, prayers of thanksgiving in a dozen languages. Passengers were hugging strangers, crying with relief. "Ladies and gentlemen," Naomi's voice came over the PA, exhausted but triumphant. "Welcome to Wichita. Emergency slides will deploy momentarily. Please follow crew instructions for evacuation." But before she could finish the evacuation checklist, she heard Dr. Powell, "I need medical help now." He's not responding to CPR. The emergency slides deployed with explosive hisses, but Naomi couldn't leave her seat yet. Even with the aircraft stopped, she had responsibilities: securing the aircraft, coordinating with emergency services, and most importantly, ensuring Captain Miller got immediate medical attention. Tower, Delta 447 on the ground. We need medical personnel in the cockpit immediately. Captain is in cardiac arrest. Medical team is approaching your aircraft now. 447. Excellent job, First Officer Carter. Through the cockpit windows, she could see the army of emergency vehicles converging on their position. Ambulances, fire trucks, police cars, and, inevitably, news vans. The storm was still raging, rain hammering against the fuselage, but they were down. They were alive. Paramedics rushed up the air stairs that ground crew had pushed to the forward door. Within seconds, they were in the cockpit, taking over from Dr. Powell, who was drenched in sweat from his efforts. "How long has he been down?" the lead paramedic asked. 8 minutes of CPR, Dr. Powell reported. "He's had at least one major cardiac event, possibly two." As they worked to stabilize Miller, Naomi finally unbuckled her harness. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up with her. Lisa appeared at her shoulder with a bottle of water. "You did it," Lisa said softly. "You saved us all." "We need to evacuate," Naomi replied, forcing herself to focus. Weather's still dangerous. But as she stood, her legs nearly buckled. She'd been holding tension in every muscle for the past 30 minutes of crisis, and her body was finally registering the strain. The evacuation was remarkably orderly, considering what they'd just been through. General Harrison had taken charge of his section, directing passengers with military efficiency. The Garrett family went down the slide together, the twins actually laughing with the excitement of it all, their mother crying with relief. Martha Richardson paused at the exit, looking back toward the cockpit. She caught Naomi's eye and mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Her husband Frank added, loud enough to hear, "We were wrong about you." "God bless you, young lady." Jalen and his mother Patricia were among the last to evacuate. The teenager broke away from a line and ran to Naomi, throwing his arms around her in a fierce hug. "You're my hero," he said simply. "I'm going to be a pilot like you." Naomi hugged him back, feeling tears prick her eyes for the first time. "You'll be better than me," she told him. "You'll never have to prove you belong." As passengers gathered on the rain-soaked tarmac, being ushered toward buses, the media frenzy was already beginning. Reporters were shouting questions, cameras rolling despite the weather. "Is it true the captain died? Was this terrorism? How did you land with no engines?" Naomi ignored them all, focused on ensuring every passenger was accounted for. It was only when she saw Ethan being escorted by law enforcement that she paused. He looked broken, all his earlier arrogance gone. "Naomi," he called out, "I need you to know, I never meant for this to happen. I thought you'd just have a hard flight. Maybe need help. I wanted to prove." "You wanted to prove I didn't belong," Naomi finished for him. "Instead, you proved that you don't. You endangered every life on this plane because of your prejudice. Are you going to press charges?" She looked at him for a long moment. "That's not my decision, but I will testify to exactly what happened. Every detail." FBI agents were already on scene, having been notified of the potential sabotage. As they led Ethan away, one agent stopped to speak with Naomi. "Agent Sarah Coleman," she introduced herself. "We'll need a full statement, but it can wait until you've been checked by medical." "I'm fine," Naomi insisted. "That wasn't a request," Agent Coleman said gently. "You just performed one of the most remarkable emergency landings in commercial aviation history. You're going to the hospital, even if just for observation." It was only then that Naomi learned Captain Miller had been stabilized. The paramedics had managed to restart his heart, and he was being rushed to surgery. Dr. Powell, who had ridden with him in the ambulance, later reported that the surgical team said another 10 minutes would have been too late. At the hospital, Naomi was subjected to a battery of tests, all while the outside world exploded with the story. Her phone, which she'd finally retrieved, had hundreds of messages. Angela had called 15 times. There were texts from pilot friends, former instructors, even airlines she'd applied to years ago and been rejected by. But the message that meant the most was a video from Maya, her niece. "Aunt Naomi, you're on every channel. You're famous. You're a hero. I knew you could do anything. I'm doing my presentation about you tomorrow, and now everyone will know I was right all along." The storm outside had finally passed, leaving Wichita under a strange, golden sunset. Through her hospital room window, Naomi could see news vans in the parking lot. The story had gone national, no, international. The video clips from passengers' phones were already viral. Administrator Thompson appeared in her doorway, looking uncomfortable. "First Officer Carter, actually, that's why I'm here. The airline would like to offer you an immediate promotion to captain. It's the least we can do." "The least you can do?" Naomi raised an eyebrow. "After your people questioned my authority during an emergency?" "I apologize for that. I was following protocol." "You were following prejudice," Naomi corrected. "But I'll take the promotion. I earned it." Thompson nodded, started to leave, then turned back. "For what it's worth, I've reviewed the cockpit voice recorder transcript. Your handling of the situation was textbook perfect. Better than textbook, it was extraordinary." After he left, Dr. Powell stopped by. He'd changed out his blood-stained clothes, but looked exhausted. "Captain Miller is stable," he reported. "Triple bypass surgery. He'll live, thanks to you getting us down when you did." "Thanks to you keeping him alive," Naomi countered. "It was a team effort." He paused. "I have a confession. When I first saw you in the cockpit, when this all started, I had a moment of doubt. Just for a second. I'm ashamed of it, but I want to be honest. And now I'm going to make sure my granddaughters know your name. Know that they can be anything, do anything, no matter what anyone tells them." The door opened again, and General Harrison entered, still in his rumpled suit from the flight. "Captain Carter," he said, saluting formally. "I wanted to pay my respects. I'm not military, General." "No, but you showed the kind of courage and leadership that transcends uniform services. I've flown with Air Force pilots who couldn't have done what you did today." "Thank you, sir. I also wanted you to know that I've already made calls to contacts at the FAA and NTSB. There will be a full investigation into the discrimination you've faced, both at the airport and from ground control during the emergency. It's unacceptable." Before Naomi could respond, Lisa Chun burst in, phone in hand. "Naomi, you need to see this. You're trending worldwide. Hashtag Captain Carter is the #1 hashtag. And look," she showed her phone screen. "The president tweeted about you." The president. The tweet read, "First Officer Naomi Carter represents the best of American aviation, skill, courage, and grace under pressure. Her actions today saved 153 lives. A true American hero." Naomi stared at it, feeling surreal. This morning, she'd been subjected to humiliating security checks and dismissed by her colleagues. Now she was being called a hero by the president. "There's more," Lisa continued. 3 airlines have already made public statements saying they want to recruit you. And there's a kid, Jalen. His video about you has 5 million views already." Naomi looked up the video. It was Jalen in the airport terminal after evacuation, soaking wet from the storm, speaking directly to someone's phone camera. Everyone needs to know what really happened up there. "Captain Carter. I'm calling her captain because that's what she is. She didn't just save us. She saved us while people were doubting her, while that other pilot tried to take over, while the ground people were questioning her. She never raised her voice except to give commands. She never panicked. She explained everything, kept us calm, and flew that plane with no engines through a storm that was trying to kill us. And she did it all while some passengers were being racist, saying she couldn't handle it because she's black. But she handled it better than anyone. She's proof that skill doesn't have a color. Heroes don't have a color. They just have courage." Naomi wiped away tears. This teenager had understood something that so many adults struggled with. Her phone rang. It was Angela, and she could hear Maya in the background. "Naomi, thank God. We've been watching the news. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Angie. Tired but fine. Maya wants to talk to you." Her niece's voice came on, breathless with excitement. "Aunt Naomi, You're the most famous pilot in the world. My whole school knows who you are now. I'm just a pilot who did her job, sweetheart. No, Maya said firmly. You're a pilot who did her job, even when everyone made it harder for you. That's what makes you special. That's what I'm going to tell everyone in my presentation. After the call, Naomi finally had a moment of quiet. She thought about her father, about all the times he'd told her to reach for the sky. She thought about every instructor who'd doubted her, every interview where she'd been passed over, every moment she'd wondered if the struggle was worth it. Outside, the sun had fully set, and the storm had moved on, leaving clear skies filled with stars. Tomorrow, there would be investigations, interviews, probably a media circus. There would be difficult questions about Ethan's actions and the systemic issues they revealed. But tonight, 153 people were alive because Naomi Carter had refused to let prejudice ground her dreams. Captain Miller would recover to fly again, or perhaps retire with his life intact. Families were reunited. Children like Jalen and Maya had seen proof that excellence could overcome ignorance. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. A nurse entered with a familiar face behind her. Patricia, Jalen's mother. "I hope it's okay," Patricia said. "I had to come back and say something." She took a breath. "I've been afraid of flying since my husband died in a car accident 5 years ago. I only got on that plane because Jalen needed to visit colleges. When everything went wrong today, I thought my worst fears were coming true. But watching you, your strength, your calm, you didn't just land that plane. You showed me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what needs to be done despite the fear." "We all did what needed to be done," Naomi replied. "No," Patricia said firmly. "You did more. And in doing it, you changed lives. Not just by saving them, but by showing us who we can be." After Patricia left, Naomi finally closed her eyes, exhausted but unable to sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new flights, new opportunities to prove herself. But something fundamental had shifted today. The story of Flight 447 would be told and retold, studied in flight schools, analyzed in safety meetings. And somewhere, a young black girl would hear about Captain Naomi Carter and think, "I can do that too." The storm had passed, but its clearing had revealed something powerful. Excellence, when given the chance to shine, could illuminate even the darkest prejudices. And Naomi had shone brighter than anyone could have imagined. The FBI field office in Wichita was not where Naomi expected to spend her morning, but Agent Sarah Coleman had insisted on taking her statement while everything was fresh. The small interview room smelled of burnt coffee and industrial cleaning products, and through the window, Naomi could see news vans still circling the building like vultures. "Let's go through this one more time," Agent Coleman said, sliding a tablet across the table showing security footage from Atlanta's airport. This timestamp shows Ethan Hawthorne at 9:43 a.m. in the crew lounge. Yet the maintenance log shows he signed off on the engine inspection at 9:45 a.m. Naomi studied the footage. There was Ethan, clearly visible, arguing on his phone while Captain Miller reviewed weather reports nearby. He never left the lounge until 9:55 when we headed to the gate. "And you're certain he knew about the bird strike report?" "Every pilot on that flight should have known. It's part of the handover briefing from the previous crew." Naomi paused, remembering something. "Wait, he said something during the crisis, when the engine was failing. He said it shouldn't have failed yet. Not it shouldn't have failed, but yet." Agent Coleman's eyes sharpened, suggesting he expected it to fail, just not when it did. "That's how it sounded to me." A knock interrupted them. Another agent entered, whispering urgently to Coleman, who nodded and turned back to Naomi. "We've just searched Mr. Hawthorne's apartment. We found something interesting, emails between him and a group called Pilots for Traditional Values. Are you familiar with them?" Naomi's stomach turned. They're a fringe group that opposes diversity initiatives in aviation. They claim standards are being lowered, that unqualified pilots are being promoted for political correctness. According to these emails, several members discussed ways to expose the danger of diversity hires. Ethan volunteered to create an incident that would prove their point. Coleman showed Naomi a printed email. He wrote, "When she fails, everyone will see we were right." The words hit Naomi like a physical blow. This wasn't just personal prejudice. It was organized, planned, coordinated discrimination. How many others are involved? Naomi asked. We're still investigating. But this goes beyond simple negligence. This was conspiracy to commit aviation sabotage. Coleman's expression was grim. He's looking at 20 years minimum. Meanwhile, at Wichita's St. Francis Hospital, another drama was unfolding. Captain Robert Miller had awakened from surgery, and his first words to the nurse were, "Where's Carter?" When Naomi arrived an hour later, released from FBI questioning, she found Miller propped up in bed, looking fragile but alert. His wife Margaret was beside him, holding his hand. "Captain," Naomi said formally. "None of that," Miller rasped. "Bob. Call me Bob." He struggled to sit up straighter. "I owe you my life. All our lives. You don't owe me anything. I did my job." "No." Miller shook his head slowly. "You did my job. And yours. While I—" He trailed off, then forced himself to continue. "I need to tell you something. I've been having chest pains for weeks. Shortness of breath. I hid it because I didn't want to lose my medical certificate before retirement." Naomi stared at him, shocked. "You knew you were compromised and still flew?" "I thought I could make it 3 more months." Stupid pride. Tears appeared in his eyes. "I put everyone at risk because I couldn't admit weakness. And you, who I dismissed, who I treated like a diversity checkbox, you saved us all." Margaret Miller spoke up, her voice thick with emotion. "We have a granddaughter, Captain Carter. She's 12, wants to be a pilot. After what you did, after seeing the news, she has a real hero to look up to now." Before Naomi could respond, her phone buzzed. Lisa Chun was texting frantically. "Turn on CNN now." The hospital room TV was already on, muted. Miller reached for the remote, unmuting it just as Naomi's face appeared on screen, a photo from her airline ID badge. But it was the headline that made her blood run cold. "Sabotage in the sky. How deep does the conspiracy go?" The anchor was speaking. Sources within the FBI confirmed that First Officer Ethan Hawthorne was not acting alone. Documents obtained by CNN suggest a coordinated effort by a group of pilots to undermine diversity initiatives through manufactured crises. The target, pilots of color and female pilots, with First Officer Naomi Carter specifically mentioned in communications dated 3 weeks before yesterday's near disaster. Naomi sank into a chair, the weight of it hitting her. They had targeted her specifically. They had planned this. The report continued. "We go now to Atlanta, where airline CEO Richard Brennan is holding an emergency press conference." The scene shifted to a podium where a silver-haired man in an expensive suit looked deeply uncomfortable. "The airline takes these allegations extremely seriously. We are cooperating fully with federal investigators and conducting our own internal review. Effective immediately, any employee found to be associated with discriminatory groups will be terminated. Furthermore, we are accelerating our diversity and inclusion training programs." Miller muted it again. "Corporate covering their asses," he muttered, then looked at Naomi. "You should sue them into oblivion." "I don't want money," Naomi said quietly. "I want change." Her phone rang. Administrator Thompson from the FAA. "Captain Carter, I need you back in Atlanta immediately. There's going to be a hearing. Congress is getting involved. The Secretary of Transportation wants to meet with you personally." "I haven't even been home yet," Naomi protested. "I understand, but this is moving fast. The entire industry is in crisis mode. Your testimony could reshape aviation policies nationwide." After ending the call, Naomi stood to leave, but Miller caught her hand. "I'll testify," he said firmly. "About everything. My health issues, Ethan's behavior, the dismissive attitude I showed you. All of it. That could end your career." Miller gave a bitter laugh. "My career ended when I put pride before safety. At least now it can mean something." The flight back to Atlanta that afternoon was surreal. The airline had sent a private jet, partly for security, partly for publicity. Naomi was recognized at every turn. Airport workers applauded. Other pilots saluted. A group of young black girls ran up asking for photos, their parents crying as they thanked her. But it was a quiet moment in the Wichita terminal that stayed with her. An elderly black man, a janitor by his uniform, had stopped her. "My daughter wanted to be a pilot in the 80s," he said softly. "They told her to be realistic, be a flight attendant instead. She became a teacher, a good one, but she always wondered what if. Today, she called me crying happy tears. Said you proved it was possible all along." During the flight, Naomi's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Interview requests from every major network. A call from the White House. Publishers wanting her story. Movie producers circling. But buried in all of it was one message that made her smile. A video from Maya's school presentation. There was her niece, standing proud before her class. "My hero is my Aunt Naomi Carter. Yesterday, she saved 153 people. But that's not why she's my hero. She's my hero because every day before yesterday, she got up and kept trying even when people said she couldn't do it. She studied harder, flew better, and never gave up. Yesterday wasn't luck, it was preparation meeting opportunity." As the private jet descended toward Atlanta, Naomi could see the city sprawling beneath evening shadows. Somewhere down there, other young pilots were facing the same discrimination she'd endured. But maybe, just maybe, after today things would be different. The Atlanta headquarters of the airline looked like a fortress under siege. Media trucks surrounded the building. Protesters held signs both supporting and condemning the company, and security had tripled. Naomi was whisked through a back entrance, flanked by security guards, into a boardroom where the atmosphere was thick with tension. CEO Richard Brennan stood as she entered, extending his hand. Around the massive conference table sat the entire board of directors, several FAA officials, and surprisingly, Georgia Senator Patricia Washington, the first black woman elected to the Senate from a state. "Captain Carter," Brennan began, then corrected himself. "I apologize, you haven't officially accepted the promotion yet." "I'll accept it," Naomi said, taking a seat. "But I have conditions." Brennan's eyebrows rose. "Conditions? First, a complete independent audit of all hiring, training, and promotion practices. Not internal, independent. Second, mandatory reporting of all discriminatory incidents with real consequences. Third, establishment of a diversity board with actual power, not just advisory capacity." "That's quite a list." "I'm not finished," Naomi interrupted. "Fourth, full restitution for any pilot who can demonstrate they were passed over due to discrimination. Fifth, public disclosure of the investigation results. No sealed records, no NDAs. Full transparency." Senator Washington smiled approvingly. "Sounds reasonable to me, unless the airline has something to hide." Brennan looked at his board members, several of whom were shifting uncomfortably. "We'll need to discuss this." "You have 24 hours, Naomi said, standing. "After that, I go public with everything, including the email suggesting some of your board members knew about the traditional values group." The room erupted. Brennan went pale. "That's speculation. Email records don't speculate," Naomi replied calmly. "Ask board member Thompson about his son's membership in the group. Or ask Ms. Reynolds about the donation she made to their legal defense fund last year." Reynolds, a severe-looking woman in her 60s, stood abruptly. "How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth." Naomi faced her directly. "Your group tried to kill me and 152 other people to prove a racist point. How dare you?" Security moved closer, uncertain who they were supposed to protect. Senator Washington raised a hand for calm. "Perhaps," the senator said carefully, "we should discuss the FBI's findings." Agent Coleman, Sarah Coleman, who had been quietly observing, opened a folder. "We've identified 17 members of airline staff involved with the group, including 3 pilots, 2 maintenance supervisors, and surprisingly, 2 air traffic controllers." The implications sent another shockwave through the room. Air traffic controllers, people who had been in position to make Naomi's emergency landing even more dangerous. "Administrator Thompson," Coleman continued, looking at the FAA official, "were you aware your nephew, Kyle Thompson, was one of these controllers?" Thompson, the same man who had questioned Naomi's authority during the emergency, went white. I had no idea." "Really?" "Because we have recordings of him telling colleagues, to make it harder for her during the landing. Naomi felt sick. Even while she was fighting to save lives, people on the ground were actively trying to make her fail. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lisa Chin. "Turn on Channel 5. Now." Someone found a remote and turned on the boardroom's large screen. A breaking news banner scrolled across. "Exclusive. Cockpit audio reveals full extent of Flight 447 crisis." Somehow, someone had leaked portions of the cockpit voice recorder. Naomi's calm voice filled the boardroom, calling out commands, managing the crisis, dealing with Ethan's attempts to undermine her. But it was what came next that hadn't been public before: the ground control exchanges. "First Officer Carter, can you confirm your qualifications?" Thompson's nephew's voice, dripping with skepticism. "I'm flying a dying aircraft through a storm with 153 souls on board. My qualifications are keeping them alive," Naomi's recorded voice responded. "We really need to verify." "Verify what? That a black woman can fly? We're done here. Clear the runway, or explain to the families why you prioritize your prejudice over their lives." The recording ended. The boardroom was silent. Finally, CEO Brennan spoke. "Captain Carter, you have our complete agreement to all your terms." But Naomi wasn't done. "There's one more thing. I want Ethan Hawthorne's trial to be public. No plea deals, no sealed courtrooms. The world needs to see what happens when prejudice meets aviation." The next 3 days were a whirlwind. Naomi testified before a congressional subcommittee. Her words carried live on every major network. She faced down hostile questioners who tried to suggest she was overreacting, that Ethan's actions were isolated. Isolated? Naomi had responded to one particularly aggressive congressman. 17 employees of one airline is isolated? How many more at other airlines? How many near misses have there been because someone's prejudice mattered more than passenger safety? The congressman had no answer. But it was the testimony of an unexpected witness that truly turned the tide. Ethan Hawthorne, facing 20 years in federal prison, had decided to cooperate fully. Brought before the committee in shackles, he looked like a broken man. "The group started as just talk," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Online forums where we complained about standards being lowered, about unqualified diversity hires. But talk became planning. We shared strategies to expose what we saw as the danger. Make them fail publicly," we said. "Show the world we were right." "And you chose Captain Carter specifically?" Senator Washington asked. "She was perfect for our purposes," Ethan admitted, and Naomi felt bile rise in her throat. "Young, black, female. Everything we claimed was wrong with modern aviation. We figured if we could make her fail spectacularly." "You'd prove your point," the senator finished. "Yes, except," Ethan looked at Naomi for the first time. "She didn't fail. Even with everything stacked against her, the sabotage, the discrimination, the ground control interference, the weather, she succeeded. She saved everyone, including me." "What do you have to say to her now?" another committee member asked. Ethan's voice broke. "That I was wrong. That my prejudice nearly killed innocent people. That she's 10 times the pilot I'll ever be. And that I'm sorry, though I know that's worthless." Naomi said nothing. Some things couldn't be fixed with apologies. The reforms that came from the investigation were sweeping. The FAA instituted mandatory bias training for all personnel. Airlines were required to report discrimination incidents to a federal database. The Pilots for Traditional Values was designated a threat to aviation safety, its members banned from the industry. But for Naomi, the real victory came 3 weeks later, on a clear morning at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. She stood in the same Terminal B where this had all started, but now wearing 4 stripes on her shoulders, a full captain. The gate area was packed, not just with passengers but with media, airline executives, and significantly, a group of young pilots of color who had asked to witness this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," the gate agent announced, "we're pleased to begin boarding for Flight 1619 to Denver, commanded by Captain Naomi Carter." The symbolism of the flight number wasn't lost on anyone. 1619, the year the first enslaved Africans arrived in America. The airline had wanted to make a statement. As passengers boarded, many stopped to shake Naomi's hand or take photos. Among them, surprisingly, were several familiar faces. General Harrison, making the same flight by coincidence, or perhaps not. The Garrett family, with young Marcus and Mia wearing plastic pilot wings and huge grins. And in first class, Dr. James Powell. Couldn't miss your first flight as captain, he said with a warm smile. Plus, I figure you're the safest pilot in the sky. Lightning doesn't strike twice. The cockpit door opened, and Naomi's new first officer appeared, a young Latina woman named Maria Santos, who looked at Naomi with barely concealed hero worship. Captain Carter, it's an honor. I graduated from Embry-Riddle 2 years after you. You were already a legend there. Let's just focus on flying safely to Denver, Naomi said, but she was smiling. As they went through pre-flight checks, everything was routine yet different. No dismissive attitudes, no questioning of credentials, no hostile jump-seaters. Just professional aviation as it should be. Atlanta ground, this is Delta 1619 requesting pushback, Naomi spoke in her headset. Delta 1619, cleared for pushback. And Captain Carter, welcome back. The skies haven't been the same without you. As the 737 pushed back from the gate, Naomi caught a glimpse of a group of children pressed against the terminal window, watching. Among them, she could swear she saw a young black girl in a homemade pilot's costume, waving enthusiastically. Delta 1619, taxi to runway 27 via Alpha and Bravo. Wind calm, visibility unlimited. It's a perfect day to fly. Roger that, ground. It certainly is. As they taxied toward the runway, Maria spoke quietly. Captain, can I ask you something? During all of that, the discrimination, the sabotage, the emergency, how did you stay so calm? Naomi thought for a moment. My father told me something when I was young. He said excellence is its own revenge. Every time someone doubts you, fly better. Every time someone tries to stop you, fly higher. Don't argue with prejudice. Outperform it. Delta 1619, cleared for takeoff, runway 27. Cleared for takeoff, Delta 1619. Naomi confirmed, advancing the throttles. As the engines spooled up and the aircraft began its acceleration, she thought about all the young girls watching the news, seeing a black woman captain commanding a commercial flight. She thought about Maya, who now told everyone her aunt was the famous Captain Carter. She thought about Jalen, who had already started flight lessons. V1, Maria called out. Rotate, Naomi responded, pulling back on the yoke. The aircraft lifted gracefully into the morning sky, climbing toward cruising altitude. Below, Atlanta fell away, but Naomi wasn't looking back. She was looking forward, to a future where a black woman in the captain's seat would be normal, not newsworthy, where excellence would be judged by skill alone. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking, she announced, her voice carrying the confidence earned through trial by fire. Welcome aboard Flight 1619 to Denver. We're expecting smooth skies and an on-time arrival. Sit back, relax, and thank you for flying with us today. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the cockpit in golden light. Naomi allowed herself a small smile. She had fought through the storm, both literal and metaphorical. Now, finally, she was flying in clear skies. But she knew the fight wasn't over. It never really was. Somewhere out, there were other pilots facing discrimination, other young people being told they didn't belong. Her victory had opened doors, but keeping them open would require constant vigilance. Her phone, set to airplane mode, still showed the last message she'd received before departure. A photo from Patricia and Jalen at a flight school, both wearing aviation headsets, huge smiles on their faces. The caption read, "Following in your vapor trail, Captain." The future was bright, and Naomi Carter was flying straight toward it. 6 months had passed since Flight 447's emergency landing in Wichita, and Captain Naomi Carter was commanding Flight 2847 from Miami to Boston when fate decided to test her once more. The weather reports had been wrong, drastically wrong. What was supposed to be scattered thunderstorms had consolidated into a massive supercell directly in their path. And now, at 35,000 feet over the Carolinas, things were about to get complicated. Captain, We're getting severe turbulence reports from aircraft ahead. First Officer Maria Santos reported, her voice tense but controlled. She'd come a long way in the months since becoming Naomi's regular co-pilot. Delta 851 just reported injuries to passengers and crew. Naomi studied her weather radar, watching the angry red blob that seemed to pulse with malevolence. The storm stretched for hundreds of miles, too wide to go around, without adding an hour to their flight time and burning fuel they might need. Miami Center, Delta 2847 requesting deviation to. Her transmission was cut short as the aircraft slammed upward, then dropped like a stone. Screams erupted from the cabin as anything not secured became a projectile. The altitude alarm shrieked. They'd lost 1,000 feet in 3 seconds. Everyone remained seated with seatbelts fastened tightly. Naomi commanded over the PA, fighting the controls as the plane bucked like a wild horse. Flight attendants, secure yourselves immediately. Through the chaos, she heard a familiar voice from the cabin. Among their 189 passengers today was Harrison Brooks, the same tech executive from Flight 447, the one who'd complained and filmed everything. But his voice now carried a different tone. "Everyone listen," he was shouting. "This is Captain Carter. She saved my life 6 months ago. She'll get us through this. Stay calm." The transformation of a former skeptic into an advocate would have made Naomi smile if she wasn't fighting for their lives. The turbulence was unlike anything she'd encountered before. Violent, unpredictable, seemingly malicious in its intensity. "Maria, reduce speed to turbulence penetration," Naomi ordered. "I need you to monitor engine parameters while I hand-fly us through this." "Copy that, Captain." The autopilot had long since given up, unable to cope with the extreme conditions. This was pure stick and rudder flying, the kind that separated pilots from button pushers. Naomi's arms ached from the constant control inputs, but she never wavered. Lightning exploded around them, so bright the cockpit lit up like midday. The thunder was instantaneous, a physical force that seemed to shake the aircraft's bones. Then came the hail, baseball-sized chunks of ice that hammered the fuselage with machine gun intensity. "We're losing the radome," Maria called out, watching as their weather radar went dark. The nose cone that housed it had been shattered by hail. Flying blind into the storm now, Naomi relied on instinct and experience. She felt the aircraft's movements through her hands and feet, anticipating the storm's attempts to flip them over or tear them apart. In the cabin, a different drama was unfolding. A man in row 32 was having a heart attack, the stress too much for his already weak heart. But before the flight attendants could even call for medical help, 3 passengers had responded, all doctors who had been attending the same medical conference. "We've got this," Dr. Patricia Malone called to the lead flight attendant. "You focus on keeping everyone else safe." It was teamwork born from crisis, the kind that Naomi had inspired 6 months ago. No panic, no chaos, just people doing what needed to be done. The plane suddenly rolled 45 degrees to the right, and Naomi had to use full left aileron and rudder to level them out. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she held firm. "Miami Center, Delta 2847 declaring emergency," she announced calmly, though sweat was pouring down her face. "Multiple system failures, extreme turbulence, requesting immediate vectors to nearest suitable airport." Delta 2847, nearest suitable is Charlotte, bearing 030, distance 120 miles. Charlotte. Naomi's mind raced. Could they make it that far? The hail had stopped, but the turbulence was getting worse. And now she noticed something else. The artificial horizon was showing erratic readings. The storm's intensity was affecting their instruments. "Maria, I need you to cross-check every instrument. Assume nothing is accurate until verified." "Already on it, Captain." This was why Naomi had insisted on flying with Maria regularly. She was sharp, intuitive, and most importantly, she never let ego interfere with safety. They developed an almost telepathic understanding in the cockpit. Another massive updraft caught them, shoving the aircraft up 2,000 feet in seconds. The positive G-forces pressed everyone into their seats. Then came the downdraft, even more violent, and suddenly they were plummeting. Terrain, terrain, pull up, the ground proximity warning blared. They were still at 28,000 feet. The system was malfunctioning from the extreme pressure changes. But Naomi pulled up anyway, better safe than sorry. In first class, General Harrison, because of course he was on this flight too, returning from a speaking engagement, had taken charge of his section. The retired military man was going row by row, checking on passengers, his calm authority keeping panic at bay. "This is nothing," he told a terrified young couple. "You should have seen what Captain Carter did 6 months ago. This is just Tuesday for her." But in the cockpit, Naomi knew this was far from routine. Multiple systems were failing, the storm wasn't weakening, and now she smelled something that sent chills down her spine. Smoke. "Fire warning, Engine 2, Maria announced, though the alarm was already blaring. Naomi's hands flew to the engine fire switches. This couldn't be happening. Not another engine emergency. The relief in the cabin was palpable. People were crying, hugging strangers, praying in gratitude. The man who'd had the heart attack was stable, saved by the quick action of fellow passengers. It was a victory, but they weren't down yet. "Captain," Maria said quietly, "the damage assessment doesn't look good." She was right. The radome was gone, multiple electrical systems were offline, and they had no weather radar for the approach into Charlotte. The storm had moved east, right toward their destination. "Charlotte approach, Delta 2847. We're going to need a surveillance approach," Naomi radioed. "We've lost weather radar and multiple systems." "Delta 2847, understood. We'll provide vectors. Be advised, moderate to severe precipitation at the field, wind shear alerts in effect." Of course there was wind shear. The universe seemed determined to test her at every turn. But Naomi had learned something in the months since Wichita. She didn't have to face these tests alone. "Maria, you're going to be my eyes on the backup instruments. Call out any deviations immediately." "You got it, Captain." "Charlotte approach. Do we have any aircraft that have recently landed? I need a pilot report on conditions." "Stand by, Delta 2847. A pause, then American 1776 just landed. They're reporting it's rough, but manageable with careful speed control." "Copy that." "An approach?" "This is Captain Naomi Carter." "Yes, that Captain Carter. I need your best controller on this frequency." There was a brief pause, then a new voice came on, older, confident. "Captain Carter, this is Tom Bradley. About 30 years on this frequency. Let's bring you home." The approach into Charlotte was like threading a needle in an earthquake while blindfolded. Without weather radar, Naomi had to rely entirely on Tom Bradley's vectors and Maria's callouts. The damaged aircraft responded sluggishly, its aerodynamics compromised by the beating it had taken. "Delta 2847, turn left heading 270, descend to 4,000. Tom's voice was calm, professional. "Heavy precipitation in 2 miles. Expect moderate turbulence." They hit the rain wall at 3,500 feet. The windscreen became a waterfall, visibility 0. The aircraft shook and rattled, damaged pieces of the radome, creating unusual aerodynamic effects. "Airspeed fluctuating," Maria called out. 10 knots high, now 15 low. The pitot tubes were partially blocked with ice despite the heating systems. Naomi was flying by feel more than instruments now, using power settings and attitude from memory and experience. 1,000 feet, the automated voice announced. "Minimums." Naomi couldn't see the runway. Couldn't see anything but gray. Protocol said go around, try again. But with damaged systems and worsening weather, this might be their best shot. "Continue," she said firmly. 500 feet. There, approach lights, barely visible through the rain. But the wind shear alarm screamed. They were being shoved sideways, losing altitude too fast. "Power," Maria called out. Naomi was already adding it, fighting the downdraft. The engines responded slowly, damaged electrical systems causing lag. For a moment, it seemed they wouldn't make it, that after everything, they'd fall short of the runway. Then the aircraft broke through the last of shear, and there was the runway, beautiful wet concrete stretching ahead. Naomi adjusted their alignment, reduced power, and set the wounded bird down with a firmness that spoke of control, not impact. The reversers deployed, thankfully still working, and combined with maximum braking, they stopped with 1,000 feet of runway to spare. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then the cabin erupted in cheers, applause, and sobs of relief. But Naomi wasn't celebrating yet. Charlotte ground, Delta 2847 needs immediate medical assistance and buses for passenger evacuation. We have structural damage. As they taxied slowly to the gate, pieces of the radome finally tearing free, Naomi allowed herself a moment of exhaustion. Her arms felt like jelly. Her entire body ached. But they were alive. All of them. At the gate, the evacuation was orderly despite the damage. The heart attack patient was taken off first, stable thanks to the doctors on board. Other passengers with minor injuries from the turbulence were treated by waiting paramedics. Harrison Brooks was one of the last to deplane. He stopped at the cockpit door, where Naomi was finishing her post-flight duties. "Captain Carter," he said formally, "6 months ago, I was the worst kind of passenger, entitled, prejudiced, ignorant. You saved my life anyway. Today, you did it again. I've spent these months telling everyone who'll listen about what you did. My company has instituted new diversity initiatives because of your example. You didn't just save lives, you changed them." Before Naomi could respond, he was gone, but Maria was staring at her with awe. "Does this happen to you on every flight?" "God, I hope not." Naomi laughed, finally allowing exhaustion to show. "I'd like just one normal flight. Just one." The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of investigations, reports, and media attention. The aircraft was a write-off, the storm damage too extensive to repair economically. But every soul on board had survived, and that was what mattered. The investigation revealed that the storm had been unprecedented in its intensity, a once-in-a-century meteorological event that had caught everyone off guard. The fact that Naomi had successfully navigated through it with multiple system failures was being called miraculous by some, though Naomi preferred the term professional. During this time, she received a call that surprised her. Robert Miller, formerly Captain Miller, wanted to meet. They met at a coffee shop near the airport, Miller looking healthier than she'd ever seen him. He'd retired after his heart surgery, but stayed involved in aviation as a consultant. "I've been following your career," he said after they'd ordered. "That landing in Charlotte, that was extraordinary flying." "Thank you. I've also been testifying," he continued, "in Ethan's trial, in the civil suits, in the FAA hearings, telling the truth about my own prejudices, my own failures." He paused, stirring his coffee. "Did you know they've created new medical monitoring requirements because of my case? Mandatory reporting of any cardiac symptoms, no exceptions." "That's good," Naomi said carefully, unsure where this was going. "I wanted to tell you something," Miller said, meeting her eyes. "My granddaughter, the one who wants to be a pilot, she wrote her college essay about you, about how watching you taught her that excellence speaks louder than prejudice. She got an Embry-Riddle with a full scholarship. That's wonderful. She's not the only one. Enrollment of women and minorities in flight schools is up 40% since your story went viral. They're calling it the Carter effect." Naomi hadn't known that. She'd been so focused on flying, on doing her job, that she hadn't realized the broader impact. The conversation was interrupted by her phone. It was Administrator Thompson, the real one, not his disgraced nephew. "Captain Carter, I'm calling to inform you that the President will be presenting you with the Distinguished Flying Cross next week. It's the first time it's been awarded to a commercial pilot." Naomi was speechless. The Distinguished Flying Cross was military decoration, usually reserved for combat heroism. "The President felt that your actions, both in Wichita and Charlotte, represent the highest traditions of aviation courage," Thompson continued. "Also, there's something else. The FAA is creating the Carter Initiative, a comprehensive program to combat discrimination in aviation with real teeth. Mandatory reporting, federal oversight, and serious consequences for violations. We'd like you to be on the board." After the call, Miller smiled. "You've done more for aviation in 1 year than most do in a lifetime." "I just flew planes," Naomi protested. "No," Miller said firmly. You flew planes while the world tried to stop you. And you flew them so well that the world had to change instead. The ceremony at the White House was surreal. Naomi stood in her dress uniform as the president spoke about courage, excellence, and the American dream. In the audience sat her family, Angela and Maya in the front row, both crying. Patricia and Jalen were there too, Jalen now 17, and headed to the Air Force Academy. General Harrison was in his dress uniform, saluting when she received the medal. Captain Naomi Carter, the president said, pinning the Distinguished Flying Cross to her uniform, represents the best of American aviation. She has shown that excellence knows no color, that courage knows no gender, and that determination can overcome any obstacle. Her actions have saved hundreds of lives directly and inspired thousands more to reach for their dreams. But the moment that meant the most came after the ceremony. A group of young pilots had gathered, Black, Hispanic, Asian, female, all wearing wings they'd earned in the past year. Captain Carter, one young woman said, "We call ourselves Carter's crew. We all started or returned to flight training after seeing what you did. You showed us it was possible." That night, Naomi stood on her hotel balcony looking out over Washington, D.C. The Capitol Dome was lit up, planes traced paths across the sky toward Reagan National. And somewhere out there, young pilots were studying, training, dreaming. Her phone buzzed with a message from Maya. "Aunt Naomi, I got my first flight lesson today. The instructor said I was a natural. He said I flew like I had Carter blood. I told him I did." 6 months later, Naomi was back in Atlanta, preparing for what should have been a routine flight to San Francisco. But at the gate, she noticed something different. The gate agent, the ground crew, the other pilots, it was the most diverse group she'd ever seen at the airport. Her new first officer introduced himself, Jalen's cousin, Deshaun, fresh from flight school. "Captain Carter, I can't believe I'm flying with you. You're the reason I'm here." As they walked to the aircraft, Naomi saw her reflection in the terminal windows. For stripes on her shoulders, head held high, no longer fighting for her right to be there. She'd earned it, proved it, and changed an industry in the process. The aircraft, a brand new 737 MAX with the latest safety features, had something special painted near the door, a small plaque that read "Spirit of Carter," authorized by the airline CEO himself. Inside the cockpit, everything was routine. Checklists, weather briefings, flight plans. No discrimination, no sabotage, no one questioning her right to sit in the left seat. It was what she'd always dreamed flying could be. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking," Naomi announced as they pushed back. "Welcome aboard Flight 1865, the year slavery ended, to San Francisco. We're expecting smooth skies and beautiful weather. Sit back, relax, and thank you for trusting us with your journey today." As the aircraft climbed into a perfect blue sky, Naomi thought about her father. He'd told her to touch the sky for both of them, but she'd done more than that. She'd changed it, reformed it, made it a place where others like her could soar without having their wings clipped by prejudice. A message came through from Air Traffic Control. "Delta 1865, you're cleared to flight level 370. And Captain Carter? My daughter starts flight school next month because of you. Thank you." Naomi smiled, looking out at the endless blue horizon. "Tell her the sky's no longer the limit," she replied. "It's just the beginning." As they reached cruising altitude, she noticed something on the navigation display. Other aircraft were deviating from their courses slightly, and at first she was concerned. Then she realized what was happening. They were positioning themselves to spell out 2 words visible on air traffic control screens across the country. "Thank you." It was unauthorized, probably would result in some warnings, but it was pilots across America acknowledging what she'd done, what she'd endured, what she'd changed. Deshaun was staring at the display in amazement. "Are they doing what I think they're doing?" "I believe they are," Naomi said, her voice thick with emotion she rarely showed. "How does it feel?" he asked. "To know you changed everything?" Naomi thought about it as she watched the aircraft return to their normal routes, the message delivered. She thought about every moment of doubt, every act of discrimination, every crisis that had tested her limits. "It feels," she said finally, "like flying should have felt all along. Free." The sun was setting now, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Somewhere below, a young girl was looking up at the contrails, dreaming of being a pilot. But unlike Naomi at that age, this girl wouldn't have to wonder if there was a place for her in the sky. Captain Naomi Carter had made sure of that. As Flight 1865 continued west toward San Francisco, the radio crackled with routine communications, normal traffic, the everyday business of aviation. But nothing would ever be routine again. The sky had changed. The industry had changed. And it all started with one pilot who refused to let prejudice ground her dreams, who flew through every storm, literal and metaphorical, and landed safely on the other side. The future stretched ahead, bright with possibility. And Captain Naomi Carter was flying straight toward it, bringing others along in her wake, proving with every flight that excellence, courage, and determination could overcome any turbulence. The sky was no longer a barrier to break through. It was a home where everyone who earned their wings truly belonged. If excellence is truly blind to color and gender, why do we still make people prove they belong in spaces they've already earned the right to occupy? If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories that challenge what we think we know about courage, prejudice, and the human spirit.